This is the Pfeffer on Power podcast, Accelerating Your Career, where every other week we have on this podcast somebody who can help you become more successful in your life and in your career by using principles that I talk about in the book, 7 Rules of Power, and I teach in my class. And today I am more than thrilled to welcome Jason Calacanis. I have been on Jason's podcast, This Week in Startups, 4 times, which is not much in the total number of podcasts, but it's a lot for authors.
Fifth time you get a jacket, so you got to get to 5,
Perfect.
you get the blazer. Yeah.
There you go. And I wrote a case on Jason. I met Jason when I first came on his podcast after the Power Book came out. Jason Calacanis has built an amazing angel investing ecosystem. He's written a book called Angel, which talks about how he turned $100,000 into $100 million. He is just an amazingly effective human being, and I want to welcome him to the Pfeffer on Power podcast, where we're going to talk about 3 things. Thank you for being with me, Jason.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you for making me so famous with my Stanford case study. What an honor.
There you go. So first of all, unlike many of the people on this podcast, Jason has not gone to Stanford Business School. He doesn't have an MBA. So tell us a little bit about your background growing up, kind of a middle-class background in Brooklyn, and tell us about your story.
Sure. Well, and just a little point of correction. I have been to Stanford like 6 times so far, 4 of them to come to your class and talk to students. Yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn. My dad was a bartender, mom a nurse, and went to public school until the age of 8th grade. Got in too many fights. Went to private boys Catholic school. Didn't have the money to pay for college, so spent 5 years going to Fordham University at night while I fixed laser printers that would get jammed in Manhattan from 1988 to 1993. And during that time, I just was exposed to the internet. I had been a PC user since the age of 10 years old. In 1980, 1981, 82, 83, the PC became popular. I got the PC Junior right before the IBM PC Junior right before I went to high school. And I had just been a child of that PC revolution. And so when I found out, hey, you could get paid $350, $450, $550, this is when minimum wage was $250 an hour, doing computers, I said, wow, this is could be a very powerful career. You could make 2 times, 3 times minimum wage. And that's how I paid for college. And, through a series of events, became more and more confident and ambitious, and went on to start some magazines because I thought that would be where the locus of power manifested itself in New York. And then eventually started companies, sold companies, became a millionaire, started angel investing, made more money, and started doing podcasting. And here I am at the age of 51. Can't believe what's happened in my career, and can't believe, hopefully, I've got 20 good years left to see where I can take it.
You have probably 30 good years left, or maybe even 40. One of the reasons why I wanted you on this show is that your story about getting into Fordham and your story about getting the job in the computer lab in the business school, I think really illustrates one of the things that I admire about your career, which is your willingness to break the rules. So when you were trying to get into Fordham, you would drop into the admissions officer's office without an appointment. When you wanted to get the job in the computer lab, you would dropped into the dean's office without an appointment. Talk about rule breaking and going to the top.
Yeah, I mean, these are 2 critically important things you have to do if you're going to be successful. There is a rule set that exists in the world, and most people follow that rule set. And then there's a small group of people who look at the rules and say, okay, I get those are the rules. I'm going to chart a different path here because what I'm doing is important. And the people who are responsible for maintaining those rules, I understand why they put them there. But in my determination, this situation requires a bending, breaking, or modifying those rules. And so I had not gotten into Fordham. I was going to go to Brooklyn College, and I had somebody who was one of my Taekwondo instructors when I was younger, who really had a positive influence on me, said, frequency is super important. And if people get to know you, they're going to want to root for you. So go up to this person's office and just drop by unannounced and just say hi to them at Fordham. Now, I'm in Brooklyn, the Bronx. It's an hour and a half, 2 hours on the subway. So what I would do is I had a couple of friends who were going to Fordham, and I would say, hey, what are you doing? And they say, oh, we got the Taekwondo club meeting tonight. We're going to go to dinner after. I said, great, I'll come up for karate. And I would bring my recent quarterly report card from senior year, which doesn't count. And I would ask somebody to write me a letter of recommendation. And I would knock on the door, and Mr. Edward Boland would say, oh, Jason, are you on my calendar? The second or third time I go there, I say, no, I'm going to karate. I got this letter of recommendation. He goes, yeah, no. Sit down for a second. Let's talk. You came all the way from Brooklyn? I said, yeah, I'm coming up. I got a lot of friends up here. I'm really trying to go to the school. He's like, yeah, no, I know. You told me like 17 times. And this frequency and this genuine enthusiasm I had for wanting to go to Fordham, I think got inside his head a bit, to the point at which after I'd done this 3 or 4 times, it became kind of like a joke. He's like, okay, how'd you do? Third quarter, all A's, great. How many letters of recommendation you have? Okay, 2, great. I'll put them in my file, your file. And right before the semester was to start, he called me because he felt such an obligation to me, me being such a pain in the ass, I think. And he said, listen, I'm going to Yale. It's my dream job to be admissions at Yale, because I think it was his alma mater. And he said, so I'm leaving Fordham. And I was like, I just was crestfallen because I had put all this effort into making this relationship. And he said, but I wanted to have the most non-traditional student get accepted this year to Fordham. And I said, who did you pick? And he said, you. And I was just in shock. This is on the phone in August. I'm in Brooklyn sweating in my parents' house. No air conditioning. It's the middle of August. And I said, well, isn't the semester starting? He's like, yeah, it starts in 10 days. Do you want to go to Rose Hill or Lincoln Center? And I said, what's the difference? There's no housing in Rose Hill, so it's a 2-hour commute each way, or Lincoln Center is a 1-hour commute each way. I said, I'll take the 1-hour commute. He said, okay, go to the Bursaw. You're all set, and good luck in your life. And I've never talked to Ed Boland before, but somebody sent me, after your case study and people hearing the story, somebody sent me his LinkedIn profile, and I'm trying to reach him. So if anybody knows him, tell him to listen to this. But it was, really broke something out in my head, which was like, you could wait in line, or you could find another route in. And this happened to me in Brooklyn many times. There would be a line to go to see a movie, and then because we had no money, what we do is 5 or 6 kids would pool their money, buy one ticket. That kid would go open the back door, and we'd all run in the back door to go see a Star Wars movie. Now, I don't recommend that because that's stealing, but that's another example. And I keep recognizing that this whole structure that exists in society was created to just keep people in line and to, keep the trains running on time and, things flowing nicely. But there's always room for an exception. And so be exceptional, and people will make an exception for you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And the other thing I was going to ask you about, one of the geniuses of Jason was he actually would walk by these newsstands and ask the question, how do you get to be on the cover of those magazines? In those days, there were magazines.
Yes.
And then he asked the question, who decides who gets on the cover of those magazines?
Yes.
And so the genius of beginning his career in putting out these publications was that when you put out a publication, you get to ask people questions. And when you ask people questions, if you're smart, and Jason is very smart, you will learn a lot.
Yes.
You can ask anybody anything about anything. They will answer. So that, I think, is one aspect of your career. The other interesting aspect of your career is how you distributed these publications. You kind of talk about that.
Well, it's pretty funny. So I started this 16-page photocopy newsletter because I had realized, listen, whoever gets to pick who's on the cover and do a story about somebody is critically important, because at that time, the way people found out about things in the world was through newspapers, magazines, and television. And magazines were considered the height of, high society and influence at the time. And New York was the center of this. There was a magazine called Spy, Esquire. Of course, you had Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, and whatnot, the ones that were originally there. And then there were avant-garde ones like paper magazines starting. But there's also a zine movement where people would just publish some stuff and staple it together and then sell it at a newsstand. And so I said, I'll go that route. And I figured out how to make a 16-page photocopy newsletter called the Silicon Alley Reporter. And when I did that, I printed up 2,000 copies of it. And I was trying to figure out how to get it to people. So I went to a party that night, and I just brought a luggage cart. So I was on 43rd Street at the Village Printers, which I think is still there. And there was like a store there where they were selling luggage, and they had a luggage cart. And I had all these magazines I was trying to, photocopies in bundles. And so I just put them onto this, luggage rack. And the guy sold me a bunch of cart. It was $20. And I just walked to a party at Roseland. That was happened to be an internet CD-ROM party. And I started handing them out to people. And then all of a sudden I looked up, and the entire party had stopped. And there were 500 people at this party. And every single one of them had a copy of the magazine in their hands, or was looking over somebody's shoulders, looking for themselves in the magazine and looking at their friends in the magazine. And I'm just remembering this moment, actually, now that we're having a conversation. I haven't thought about it for years. And I just looked and I was like, power. I just stopped the entire party with a photocopy because they're looking for themselves in the digital dim sum section. And I called it digital dim sum in the back. And I would put 4 pages, a 4-page spread of the 16 pages. It was 25%, just pictures of people that I had taken at parties. And people were looking for themselves and had their name and their company name and who they were talking to. And then I was like, there's an opportunity not just to have one cover, there's an opportunity to have 50 covers. If you're a nobody and I put you in the back of the magazine, you were in a magazine, you know what you're going to do? You're going to buy 10 copies and show it to your friends. And it all just clicked. And that magazine became a 100-person company, 300-page color glossy, doing $11 million a year. And it was quite a run. And I had a New Yorker profile done on me. I was on Charlie Rose. I was the cover on the business section of the New York Times. Because knowing about the internet 6 months or a year before most people is the equivalent of like knowing the end of history. Like, at that moment in time, the internet was so important that you knew things that other people didn't. You were an oracle. And if you knew the people and you were picking the winners, you were like, literally the story that was written about me was called The Connector. And that was the story that Larissa McFark had written about me. And when I went to lunch with her, she had brought in her friend, this new reporter at the New Yorker named Malcolm Gladwell, who hadn't written any books, but he sat with me and he said, oh, Jason, you know about the Dunbar number? You're like a super router of people, and there's a study on Dunbar. And anyway, you're a connector in social science. I mean, this is in 1998 we're having this conversation. And the name of the piece in the New Yorker was The Connector. And it talked about how I was going to go on and have this career and be a media mogul. And I'm not a media mogul exactly, but a mini mogul in some ways in terms of writing checks to investing companies. And I ran that up as fast as I could, and it was really about relationships. Every morning, I'd have breakfast with somebody at Michael's. Every lunch, I'd have a lunch with somebody at Nobu, like a couple of days a week, and then I would meet with my team before and after. So there were 10 meetings a week, plus every night I was out on the town. And so my schedule, my assistants, the editors would say, you're having breakfast with this person, you're having lunch with this person, Gramercy Tavern or Nobu, Gramercy Tavern or Nobu, what do you want to eat today? And I just networked like a madman because I said, you know what, everybody wants to meet me. So I just told them, you want to do breakfast, you want to do lunch, or you want to do the Knicks game. You can take me to a Knicks game. You just have to have good seats. We can go to Nobu or Gramercy Tavern. You're buying, or we can go to Michael's. I'll buy breakfast. It's hilarious when I look back on it. I was a bit of a maniac.
Yeah, but the other part of this that I love is the story about you starting. So not only did you start the magazine, but then you started the list, the Silicon Alley
100,
not Silicon Valley, the Silicon Alley 100.
Yes.
And your genius for creating controversy.
Yes.
So first of all, your staff didn't want you to create a list because you'd piss people off.
Yep.
And secondly, they wanted DoubleClick to be at the top of the list, and you intentionally chose somebody or something else because you understood the power of lists.
Yes, the consensus was DoubleClick was the most important company on the East Coast in the internet. And DoubleClick is still considered the most important acquisition ever made in the history of technology companies because DoubleClick is, a large portion of Google's revenue to this day. They created the ad networks on the internet for display advertising. And it was pretty clear they were far and away the number one company. And I said, you know what? I'm going to make Esther Dyson number one because she was here before them. She set up all this whole industry. And I'll explain it as such, that there wouldn't be a DoubleClick if Esther Dyson hadn't done Release 1.0 in New York and hadn't done all this angel investing. It makes perfect sense to me, and it will be a huge controversy. So it's sort of like picking, Kobe over LeBron or Michael Jordan over LeBron or LeBron over Michael Jordan. It just leads to hours and hours of speculation. My team didn't want me to rank the list. And they came to me as a group and said, listen, we don't want to rank the list. It's too divisive. We're getting all kinds of people angry at us. People want to know the number, and tell them that your only job is to say whether the person's in the top third, the middle third, or the lower third, and that Jason does the ranking after that. And then people were lobbying my people to, hey, can you get me up from the bucket? I know I'm in number 3. Can you get me to number 2 at least? Or they're in number 2. Hey, can I make an argument for being number 1? And I just tweaked it, and my team didn't even know until the last minute. So I just told everybody make 1-pagers, and then I sat with the designer and I just said 1, 2, 3, 4. No, 1, 2, 3, 5, 4. And I just laid it out, and people kind of found out. The only people who really knew in the company were like the last editor, the producer, the designer, because they had to put the numbers on each profile page, and then the printer and me. But it leaked. Yeah. It always leaked.
And by the way, as objectively as you did it, that's how the Fortune, by the way, does the most powerful women list. I mean, it's just as much science. But the point of ranking and the point of Jason creating this list and then everybody begging him to be higher ranked on the list, I love it.
Hilarious. The kid from Brooklyn. It just shows you human nature. Humans want to be recognized. And if you're the person who can give that recognition, well, that's a big deal. Look at our relationship. You told me you wanted to write a case study. I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, I can't get into Stanford, and you want to write a case study on me? And then I got one of the Ivy League schools contacted me in the last year and was like, hey, we're thinking about a professor for startups and capital allocation. Would you consider that? I know you're busy. And I was like, wow, this is actually really happening. The schools I could never get into are writing case studies and want me to teach a course and be an adjunct. Like, that's pretty heady stuff, is it not?
Yeah, well, you deserve it because you've been extraordinarily successful and extraordinarily smart about your success and extraordinarily smart about creating controversy. Jason, you remember you stood up for Travis Kalanick of Uber at the time when there was all kinds of controversy. I think he had referred to Uber as Boober because it helped him get women, and there was all kinds of issues of abuse and legal liability and all kinds of things. And at a time when nobody stood behind him, you did.
Yeah, I mean, he was getting beat up pretty badly, and I went on CNBC pretty famously. I said, hey, you're the 3rd investor in the company, 4th investor in the company. How do you stand by this person? And they just read me the whole list. And I said, people like to think that these great entrepreneurs, are born that way, but they're actually made. And I said, and this is the moment that makes the great entrepreneurs. So what you're actually witnessing here are some actual mistakes. Some of them overblown, some of them maybe underreported on. I'm sure there's 1,000 more of them. But this will be one of the great entrepreneurs of our lifetimes, and they will get through this. And Travis will be legendary for the rest of his life, not only for this company, but whatever companies he does after that. And man, I got a little bit of heck for it. And then I got a lot of praise. And then people said, wow, you stand by your guy. And I said, well, how do I not stand by him? I made the bet. It worked out really well for me. And, if he made a couple of mistakes or other 2 people on the team made the mistakes, let's give him the chance to grow from it. So it's a crucible moment. And let's see what happens when he gets through it. Everybody's got to face some darkness and some challenge in their life. This is like some Joseph Campbell shit. Like, let's see if the hero emerges from the other side. I can tell you, I know this hero. He's going to defeat the Emperor, and he's going to redeem Darth Vader. And, this is a Jedi, like unprecedented power and character.
And the other thing you've done, which I encourage people to do, which they don't, is you do events. Sure. You do a launch, you do Angel University, you do Startup University. And one of the things that one of the people who I talked to about your case said, you always do events of very high quality. So the event infrastructure, and where one event feeds into the other, I think has been really important in building this amazing ecosystem.
It wasn't always like that. I was on a nickel early on. So my trick early on was I would just get a table for like 10 or 12 people at a Mexican joint or a pizzeria, like a nice Italian pizzeria joint. Cheap. And what I would do is I'd say, listen, I got a bunch of guys coming. They're really busy, gals. Just put some sangria on the table. Give me the 2 pitchers of sangria, pitcher of margaritas. Put out the quesadillas, put out the tacos, put out the fajitas. But I want the food and the drinks on the table as people sit. And just come to me, I'll order more. And don't put menus down. And man, that saved me a bundle. Because if people had to order, their own drinks I'd ordered 3 things. I would never been able to afford it. And then as time went on, I got sponsors. And I said, listen, I used to have this thing at Fred's, which was a private restaurant. It was a nice restaurant at the top of Barney's. And I happened to be friends with Mark Strausman, who was the chef and who ran it. I said, Mark, what's the night that's the slowest night? He said, well, Mondays, we're closed, and Tuesdays. And I said, can I come Mondays nights? Could you do it for $100 a head? He's like, you realize like this is like a 200 a head person. I was like, yeah, I know. I'm trying to build my base here. I'm trying to get some things going, but I'm going to bring all these venture capitalists who, they might rent the place when they see you got this beautiful restaurant here. And he was trying to get people to the place. So he said, okay, fine, sure, whatever you want, Jake Al. And I'd been friends with him. And so I just invite 12 venture capitalists. He did it for me, $1,200 plus tax and tip. I get out of $1,500. And then I went to my law firm and I said, you know how I introduced you to a bunch of people? I want you to host this dinner with venture capitalists. You should meet a couple more VCs. And they're like, you're kidding. And they're like, how much is it? And I was like, well, it's $1,500. So I said, $3,000. They're like, great. So I made money on it.
I love it.
And so this was like, was it Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn who got people to paint the fence and gave them the apples?
Tom Sawyer.
It was Tom Sawyer, right? Because I had always remembered that story. And I said, I'm going to Tom Sawyer this one. I said, this is a great party here. You should just pay for it. And you know what? To their credit, I told the folks I'm going to make a little profit on it. And it became quite a ticket because there were only 12 seats. But I wouldn't let people introduce themselves. This was another little power tip. I wanted people to know that I had a relationship with everybody in that room, even if I didn't. I wanted to introduce them. So I'd say, clink my glass. Hey, everybody. Okay, I'd stand up. Hey, everybody, I just wanted to thank you for coming. My good friend, Mark Strausman, best chef in New York. Mark, can you come out and say hi to everybody, tell them what they're eating? Mark would come out. Oh, thank you so much, chef. Incredible appetizers. Let me go around the table. This is Fred Wilson. Fred is, of course, from Flatiron Partners. They invested in these 2 companies. They were in the magazine, and actually they were on the cover of the magazine for episode 7. One of the great venture capitalists here in New York. Okay, next up is this entrepreneur. Let me explain to you what they've done. And we had a great time in the Hamptons last weekend. Thanks so much for inviting me out. And this was I'm just remembering this now when I talk to you. This is one of these techniques I realized. It was taking too long for people to introduce themselves, and they made it into an ad. So I started introducing people just to make it go quicker. But then I realized, somebody came up to me like, you know everybody. But 3 of the 4 of the people I was meeting for the first time. And I just said, this person from Acme Ventures did one of the great investments of all time in Delta Corporation. This person from Sunshine Ventures. Oh my God, they invested in Rose Computing. What a great bet. The first time I met the person. But that sort of started me off on my way to, again, the person throwing the party gets a disproportionate amount of credit for everything that happens after that. So all these people wind up, I have people who've come to my parties and told me they met their wife, they had 3 kids, and they send me pictures. I met my wife at this thing you did, or I met my co-founder, and they credit me with having some big part in their, life. So much so that somebody said, would you officiate our wedding? I couldn't do it, but I was like, well, that's incredible. Like, you want me to officiate your wedding? Okay. I don't know how that works. I'm not a priest or a rabbi, but okay. So anyway, these little things you do add up. I think people thought I was there's a downside to this too. People thought I was an over promoter. People thought I was crass. People thought I was narcissistic or had a big ego. And I didn't give a fuck. But I didn't care what other people thought about me because I came from Brooklyn, where the second you showed any weakness or that you cared about somebody insulting you, like the other hyenas would pounce. So if somebody said something to you like, you got a big forehead, you ugly bastard, your mom's this, whatever, and I would just say to them, well, you guys haven't seen your mom? And insults would fly. I'm talking about when I'm 12, 15 years old. And the second somebody cried, then all 20 people would just attack that person relentlessly. And then they would call them a crybaby and whatever they made them cry. This was Lord of the Flies I grew up with. So nobody's opinion ever mattered to me, which is fantastic for, wanting to accumulate power and do these things, because people made fun of me. You don't know what you're doing with publishing. You don't even have an editor. You have no pedigree. There's spelling errors. This is, you don't even know what a fact check. And they would say all this stuff to me. And I would say, what have you done? Because I had 1,000 people at my event last week, and they paid $1,000 each to come, and it was sold out, and I made $1 million. What did you do last week? Nothing. Right. So don't tell me anything. You're just a hater, And then I would just call them, we came up with a name. I just called them Jaders, Jason haters. I said, you're just a Jader. In truth, the criticism was true. So whatever they said to me, I listened intently. The spelling errors. I need what's it called? A copy editor? Then I just go back. Does anybody know what a copy editor is? They're like, yeah, copy editor. That's what Susan's doing. I'm like, is Susan a copy editor? She's the managing editor. He's like, yeah, she's managing editor. She's doing the copy editing. I said, we need to have a copy editor. There were like 3 spelling errors. They're like, yeah, we told you this 3 months ago. You said you didn't have the money. I was like, okay, well, I was wrong. Get a copy editor in here. And so you just listen to all that criticism. You write it down, but you don't let it affect you. It's like somebody telling Steph Curry, like, hey, when you took that shot, you didn't plant your left leg. It's like, it's the greatest shooter of all time. You don't think he, A, knows that he made a mistake. B, of course he's going to take that note. Yeah, I know. Duh. And so if you want to be a great shooter, you watch tape of yourself. You watch your mistakes. But you have to have a thick skin. And when I meet the kids in your class, God bless them, they're so scared of criticism. They're so scared of falling. They're so scared of tripping in front of those other people. I watch them in the class, how nervous they are asking a question. What are their peers going to think of their question? You can feel their anxiety. It's like dripping off of them. And I'm like, you're at Stanford, GSB. You're paying $75,000, whatever you're paying for this thing. You were picked out of 1,000 people who want this seat, and you're nervous? You're going to rule the world with this degree. And you watch them, they're intimidated to ask a question. Or they're scared of my reaction or yours. And you're like, oh, I get it. They've been winning so much that they're afraid to lose. Their whole career up into GSB has been winning. My career was being ignored and being a nobody. So the second I saw the people at the party looking at that magazine, it didn't matter if it was spelling errors or if it was printed on a photocopy machine. I captured 500 people's attention at a party. I stopped the party with my product. What's next? Let's go. Can we make it 32 pages? Can we make it color? Can we make it glossy? And then I would just sit there with everything we did. I said, I want to show every single time we do this magazine or party something that's 25% better. I want to show demonstrable growth. And we had a credo, demonstrable growth. Whatever we did had to be a little better than the last time. So the print people were like, the magazine's getting really thick. I said, yeah, what about this? And I threw a Japanese magazine on the table that I had gone to, because I would go to the magazine stores constantly, and the obscure ones. I said, how is this magazine got this paper stock? And they said, that's not a magazine, J.Cal, that's a MOOC, like one of my smart people. I said, what do you mean MOOC? You know what they call you a MOOC in Brooklyn? That means you're an idiot. He said, it's a magazine book. It's something only exists in Japan. I said, but look at the stock. They said, yeah, that's 100-pound stock and 80 pounds on the inside. The paper has a certain weight to it. I said, great, next issue. I want this. They said, it's going to cost $20,000. I said, get Absolute or Mercedes on the phone. Tell them we're doing the best paper stock for the year-end episode and that they're paying for it. And that was going to be like the keepsake. They were like, yeah, let's go. I said, great. Tell them it's going to be a fold-out cover. And we're going to fold. That's like another $6,000. I said, we're not paying for it. What's wrong with you people? Make it exciting, and let's do some demonstrable growth. People went nuts. When they got it, I got 1,000 people. Jason, I got the telephone book at my house. I thought it was the telephone book, and it was Silicon Valley Reporter. This thing is so heavy. There's so many ads in it. I said, yeah, this is our year end. It's a big year for 2000. We wanted to have it be special. And it's like little things like that, that you can do that people notice. And that was, going to Fred's, the place at the top of Barney's that was closed and opening for us. And there was no menu, but the chef who owned it was there. And I knew him, and he was my guy. And he was going to come out and talk to everybody, bringing the chef out and giving him a hug, my professional guy. And then Mark would always say something nice about me. And I would always give a huge tip to everybody. That was the other thing I learned is like, you hand people $100 bills or $50 bills or even $2 bills, they feel special. So I used to keep $2 bills in my backpack. I would always give busboys, whatever, a couple of $2 bills. They always remember me as a $2 bill guy. But I would always give the waiters a crisp $100 bill, or I'd have my guys give me like stacks of $100 bills. And I would just go thank every single person at every event I did at the beginning of the event. I would walk in, I'd say, thanks for working on the event. And I'd give them each a crisp $100 bill. I'd say, get me $5,000 when I would throw an event. This is $1 million event with probably a $500,000 budget. I'd say, give me 1%, give me $5,000 in cash. I'd take those $100 bills and I would just give it to each security guy, each AV guy. I said, I really appreciate you coming. We're going to have a great show. I just wanted to buy you lunch. Boom. This is New York. Some people are like, we don't get tips. And I was, we're union, whatever. I said, you know what? It's just for lunch, whatever miscellaneous expenses you happen to run into. Don't worry about it. I'm from Brooklyn. We tip everybody. I walk away. So that was another little secret. I had all little secrets like that. And then anytime I had a problem, there was no problem. But everybody else was cheap bastards would never tip. And certainly nobody had the presence of mind to tip on the way in. That's like a superpower move. But I learned all this stuff growing up in Brooklyn. I watched the wise guys. They would walk into a place, they'd just boom, boom, boom. They'd hit the busboy, they hit the maitre d', they hit the waiter, they hit the bartender, boom. The manager. On the way in, they were treated like a king.
Jason, amazing. So there are 3 lessons. Number 1, if you pay attention to Jason, you don't care. You listen to what other people say about you, but you don't take it in, you don't care. And Jason really exemplifies this. I still remember taking a walk with somebody who was on his podcast. He was complaining about Jason. I said, do you think Jason cares? The answer, of course, is no. Number 2, do events, create resources. Jason has been amazing at creating resources basically out of nothing. And third, of course, break the rules. Jason, thank you so much for spending the time to be with me. You exceeded my wildest expectations. You're fantastic. Thank you.
Well, it's been great to get to know you over the years, and you've really got me thinking about it and really trying to think of the blueprint and how I figured some of this stuff out. And then all the tips I get from you, your observations are so powerful. So congratulations on the new podcast. I'll be listening.
Thank you. This has been the Pfeffer on Power podcast, accelerating your career. If you like this podcast, please subscribe. If you want more information, go to LinkedIn or Twitter and look me up. I have a personal website, jeffreypfeffer.com. The last name is spelled Pfeffer.com. And for those of you who aren't in Stanford, aren't in my class, want these tips, buy 7 Rules of Power.
Great book.
It's got all of these stories, and Jason thinks it's a great book. Jason, thank you for being on.
My pleasure. My pleasure.